Ladies and gentlemen, the long awaited, highly anticipated, by popular demand, our resident psychiatrist and scientist, Dr. Charles Zorumski from Washington University.
Well, hey, Kevin. Thanks for inviting me back, man. This is kind of almost getting to be a regular thing. So, no, it's great to be here with you.
Oh,
Uh,
hey, I planned on it. I mean, you're a diamond in the rough, maybe. You're the one that makes it all go. But everybody, to a person who listens to you, is saying, man, that guy, you got to have that doctor back on, man. You know?
wow, that's good. That means I haven't really offended anybody yet. Yeah, so that's
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
Uh,
Just very informative and spot on. And that's hopefully we blend in what we're about to talk about is the emotional and mental triggers that happens to an individual on and off the field that I have found it was like I'm reading the book that's it's like Kevin Whalen, read this book, when I walked right past it. It was about the triggers that one can understand, the clues and the cues of when to, this is coming. Your episode's about to happen, okay? Your
right.
body and mind works together, say, hey, we got to help this guy. And they talked about, the grinding of the teeth. And and then there was some other stuff, you're just, when you're about to have an outburst of, how was the proper terminology? Mental wellness, or mental, how should I say it, doctor?
Wellness is a great term.
Okay,
Having mental wellness is a thing that'll carry you through your life. So that's what we're all in, more or less. That's what we're all striving for,
right.
is a state of mental wellness. And this is so important, Kevin. Uh, I've said to people, there is no such thing as health without mental healh. Uh, you know,
Right.
uh, and if a human being has mental health, mental wellness, whatever you want to call it, they can deal with a whole lot of other stuff in their lives, a lot of bad stuff in their lives. But if you don't have mental health, you can be devastated by so many things. So it's a really important topic, and how you get to wellness is a really tough thing. Medicine deals with illness, but that's not the right way to think about health and wellness necessarily from an illness model. But your points are right on. I mean, it's mental wellness and mental health is a key
Yeah.
thing for all of us, including athletes, maybe in particular athletes.
So for people that think they don't know nothing, this is an easy peasy. So you got a car. Hey, every once in a while, look at those gauges, man. You might have to put some RO in, or E for gasoline, you know, and and that, these kind of stuff happens, and that's just one of those. What this mental wellness, you come on, man. Everybody has a sense. Not everybody, because you've been in the thrones, but getting into semi, you could help yourself a whole bunch before the jail, before uh, death, uh, before having a very miserable existence because people flee you. That you don't handle yourself well. Well, these things you can help. It's easy to reach out, and everybody is kind of different, but the overall bundle of, hey, if you got this, go there, you know, and I have found that that was really real, and I wanted to talk to somebody about it, and nobody came around, and all of a sudden, Dr. Chuck Zorumski's on. I said, "There's the man. There's the doctor." So, uh, if I can, I would like to be able to maintain uh, audio silence and hear what you have to say about the recognition and what to do when those triggers come.
Yeah, Kevin. Well, this is some great comments that you made, and the car analogy is an interesting one. The problem for us as human beings is we don't have gauges, right? I mean, we don't really have things that tell us we're running out of gas, or tell us that the spark plug need to be replaced, your battery needs replaced, and stuff like that, or to rev your batteries up. We've got to figure that stuff out on our own, and that's kind of how our mind works, in kind of what we've talked a little bit before. So essentially, this discussion ends up in talking about human emotion as a big thing, and humans are emotional creatures. Period. Everybody has emotions. As a matter of fact, there's famous psychologists and anthropologists who've kind of written about there possibly being like something like 6 primary human emotions: happiness, sadness, fear, anger, surprise, and disgust as being primary. And the reason they call them primary is that across all human populations on the planet, people use virtually the same facial signals, the same facial expressions to express those different emotions. So that's why they get called primary. And then there are secondary emotions that come out of that. Things like anxiety, for example. And anxiety is not the same thing as fear. So although they use similar circuits in the brain, and we can talk a little bit about that, but fear is usually something that's geared out of something that's perceived as a threat, usually pretty immediate kind of threat. Like, for example, if you happen to walk some of the streets in St. Louis at night, you are likely to have a fear reaction to being on those streets. You'll have a fear reaction if you have a brain, in my opinion, because if you're not afraid sometimes on the streets of St. Louis at night, you aren't paying attention to what's around you. So fear can be very real kind of thing. And then anxieties are kind of things that are more distant, things that, what might happen, what kind of things are going to happen to me, but both of them can be very kind of impairing to an individual, and we can talk about how that kind of comes into play. But like something like a fear response, we know a lot about the circuitry of how fear is processed in the brain, thanks to work by a number of great scientists, a guy named Joseph Ledoux, who's in New York, and other folks, Michael Davis, who was at Emory for some time. They've done great work on this. And the interesting thing about fear as a primary emotion is that it is not necessarily processed where you're aware of it. And this kind of gets into some of the symptoms you're talking about, the gnashing of teeth and all that kind of stuff. Well, you can process fear. You can become fearful of something and not even know what it is that you're afraid of, because fear can be processed without your higher brain. It can be processed in lower brain centers like the amygdala and places like that to trigger a response to what you perceive as a fear. So, for example, you're walking the streets of the city in our neighborhood, for example, and wandering a little too far down Grand Avenue. You hear something in the background, kind of the crunching of something, or something goes on, and man, your body and your body jumps into a defensive kind of mode right off the bat, and you're not even aware of what you heard. You become aware of it kind of after the fact, and that's kind of how sometimes our emotions are actually processed. There's something that we're either thinking about or something that we perceive that triggers an emotional response, and then that may be all processed without us even being aware of what it is that we're afraid of or worried about. And then after the fact, as that's being processed, your body has a reaction driven by your brain, which is your heart rate goes up, you start sweating, your respirations go up, your breathing becomes a little more struggled, and things like that. You're sweating, other things like that. And once you start to have some of those physical manifestations, the brain now is processing all of that information and says, aha, here's what's going on, and we're kind of afraid of different things. Well, if you move that to just concepts, like for example, a player getting ready to play a game. I mean, man, Kevin, you and I've been around a lot of athletes, and God, you got Terry Mickler on. I mean, Terry's been around. God, I have no idea how many people Terry Mickler's been around as athletes, and I will put money that all of them are in an emotional state before they play. Some handle it different ways, but some are just flat out anxious about the game and what's going to happen. Some are fearful. I mean, you walk on the field with certain players, we won't name any of those players, and there's a chance you're going to get hurt when you play the game, right? So fear is part of it, but so is the anxiety about how you're going to perform and things like that. And athletes have to learn to deal with their emotions and deal with the anxieties, because while the game has a high emotional component to it, that's not all the game is. So you have to use the higher parts of your brain, the cognition. So like we've talked before, the human mind really has, in simple terms, has three main components, and that is it has emotion, or attaching meaning to the stuff that's around us. It has motivation, or how we set goals and how we work toward the goals. And then we also have the wonderful trait that humans have is higher order cognition, the ability to think and reason through problems, and to plan and decide things. Those things work in concert when everything's working well and help to regulate each other in many ways. But the bottom line is emotion. If somebody thinks they're going to live their life with no emotion, I think they're ridiculously and badly mistaken. That's not how it works. Humans have emotions, and sometimes they run amok as they lead into sometimes psychiatric illnesses and more difficulties in life. So I don't know if that's helpful as kind of a starting set of comments and things to think about.
Well, I tell you, I'm like wow factor, and if I wasn't me and I was just listening to this, I would say, I'm going to listen to this again. And the story comes up is that it came to me, why is the breathing so important, or oxygen to my system, that will, you know, alleviate it, my emotions quicker to the higher order?
Man, Kevin, that is a great question and leads into something I talk about kind of regularly. And so it's about how your brain works and how it perceives and what it needs to work properly. So our brains need oxygen. Particularly under times when we're stressed and other things like that, because oxygen's critical for the function of the brain. But I'm gonna give you stuff that I try to teach residents and medical students, and that over the years I've been in psychiatry. And these are if you will, they're 5 simple principles that I think govern how our brains work. And I think these will lead into some discussions about what can go wrong in illnesses and other things like that. So your oxygen question is point number 1, and that is the brain. And this is going to sound weird because I'm going to put these in some odd terms. Human brains are hungry. They use a huge amount of energy. So a typical human brain weighs about 3 pounds. Human beings, typically weigh 150 to 170 pounds, although in some places that can be quite a bit higher than that. Some places a bit lower than that. But so you got a 3-pound structure sitting on your shoulders. That 3-pound structure uses at least 1/5 or 20% of the output of your heart goes to fuel your brain. At least 20% goes to fuel your brain. That's telling you the brain is an energy gobbling machine. And anything you can do to make your brain a better energy user, like diet, exercise, things like that, physical fitness, all of those things make your brain a more efficient thing. So that's the first principle, is your brain is hungry and you've got to keep it fed. And that means the brain uses uses energy supplies, and it uses oxygen like a banshee, because that's who's using most of your cardiac output. But that also creates a problem for the body. So 3 pounds on a 170-pound human, using a fifth of the cardiac output, means you don't have a whole lot. Your body doesn't have a whole lot more that it can send to the brain. It's got to fuel all the rest of your body and all the other functions that the body has. So that's the first principle, is the brain is hungry. A second principle for me in how the human brain works is that, and this is going to sound weird, it is slow and lazy. The human brain is, we like to think of it as a computer, that, we're processing information like a computer. Yeah. We are lousy computers. We are slow and lazy, and our brains take shortcuts to work less hard, because I just told you it's already under basal conditions. It's gobbling a whole bunch of cardiac output. The heart can't keep pumping the stuff to the brain, so it takes shortcuts to come up with solutions to things. And what that means is things that you've learned in your life, things that are kind of imprinted in you from very early in life, what are sometimes called in statistics priors. So the human brain doesn't really encounter totally new situations. We have schemas for almost everything that happens. They may not be correct, but the brain has a way of processing information, so you're never overwhelmed almost in any situation. Now, you can be overwhelmed by emotion and other things like that, but you have some sense of what's going on around you. And that's kind of the slow and lazy thinking of the brain. It takes shortcuts to solve problems. So when you're told something by a friend, you immediately have a schema for how that may actually work. And now the rest of your work is to figure out whether the stuff your brain has told you right off the bat is really correct. And that takes work, and that takes more energy to do that kind of thinking. So brain's hungry, it's slow and lazy, meaning it takes shortcuts. And the third thing that comes out of all of that, because it's slow and lazy, your brain makes mistakes. Matter of fact, it makes a lot of mistakes. I mean, you think about your life and how often you perceive something and you were just wrong about it in the first blush. The first pass at something that happened to you, you come back to realize, God, I was wrong about that. I was wrong about that person. I was wrong about the situation in a game, about how that actually happened. So your brain makes mistakes. And we all think, well, that's horrible. No, that's how it works. The brain is trying to do things as quickly as it can and as efficiently as it can, but it's using prior information many times to solve new problems. And sometimes those solutions don't work in mistakes. Related to this, and this is going to sound horrible for some people, your brain is not a truth-generating device. It is not about truth. Your brain is about keeping you alive. So your brain tells you the story that makes you stay alive. Like, for example, I thought I was going to come in here today and say something useful to you. That's what my brain was telling me. As I keep talking, I'm not sure I'm saying anything useful for anybody. That's a lie that my brain was telling me. And I tell this to residents all the time. Their brains tell them to come into the hospital because they're going to have a good experience and they're going to learn it's going to be okay. Well, some days they come into the hospital and they get brutalized by the stuff that happens in a hospital. Yeah. So, but your brain keeps you doing it because it tells you, we go out and get beat 5-0 by somebody one game. We got to come back and play a game maybe the next day or within several days after that. Your brain tells you, you can go do this. You can do this, man. You can make this happen. It's going to be okay. Well, man, your brain may be lying to you to tell you that, right? Because your team may not be good enough that it's going to be better than that. But yet, that's how we go on and function, is that we deal with the fact our brains are there to keep us alive and keep us functioning. So the brain makes mistakes. and it is not a truth-generating device. Our brains, though, are creating our reality. So, Kevin, your world and your reality is not the same as my world. It's not the same as other players on a given team. We all have our own world, and that sounds a little crazy. That God, there's some ultimate truth out there that anchors all of us, and maybe that's true, but we all perceive it in different ways. I mean, this is the you want you want to see how differently our brain processes information, and how it creates our own realities. Just take a neutral stimulus for us. Say the name Donald Trump. There's a neutral stimulus, and if you say the name Donald Trump to 100 people, you're going to get probably 100 different opinions about what Donald Trump actually means. Yes, there is a historical character and a president of the United States who has that name, but we all have a different perception of what that person really is and what that person is all about. And it ranges from anything from angelic and great to demonic and worst thing that ever happened to the planet and whatnot. And in between somewhere is probably where the truth kind of lies in that. So that's our brain creating our own reality. Now, this all sounds really bad, everything that I've said up to this point. But the fifth point that I would make is that your brain is plastic. The human brain is incredibly plastic, which means it learns and remembers information. It is an information processing machine and a machine that learns from experience and learns from what's going on. That is an amazing trait that the human brain has. So we don't always know everything, but we're capable of learning many things. Now, there are some people who learn much better than others. There's no doubt about that. And others who are not blessed with a well-functioning brain, who really struggle to learn some things. But every human brain has some degree of plasticity, and some brains have a lot of plasticity. Plasticity feeds back to my first point, which is about the brain being hungry. If you want to talk about what gobbles up energy in the brain, it's that plasticity to learn and remember all kinds of new things. So anyway, those are 5 principles that I kind of live by as I think about what we do in a laboratory, what I've done clinically, and what I try to teach young physicians and folks who are going into psychiatry, neurology, and other disciplines like that. So I hope that helps somewhat and makes some sense. You have to give me feedback and tell me whether it does, because some of this stuff can get a little weird that I've just described.
Well, all I could tell you is that we're starting right now. I just signed the papers, a building and an addition onto your wing, the Dr. Chuck Zorumski's wing for the Wales Certified Hall of Affinity, if that helps.
That helps a lot, Kennedy. Kevin, that is absolutely great. Yeah,
All right.
And this thing about the brain making errors, we're all kind of might be bothered by that when you start thinking about what that really means. But take human memory for example, Kevin. There's a wonderful book that it's probably about 20 years old or maybe even older than that, but written by a really good psychologist named Daniel Schachter. It's called The 7 Sins of Memory. And the book is really about how memory is not what he would call a constructive device, which means you're constructing memories. That's what it is actually doing. It's pulling in things and making the memories out of your past, in your present, in your future. It's making and creating the memories. It's not simply a reproductive device so that you say, I remember the game for Stagg versus Kudus in the Open Cup in the early part of 1972, and I remember a bunch about that game because it had a big impact on me. But much of what I remember about it is a reconstruction that my brain has done about how that game was played and other things like that. And so there are many ways that our memories are false. And in Schachter's book, he talks about errors of omission which means that you're forgetting certain things. So sometimes I think everybody's had this experience. You block on something, like I know something about Kevin Whalen. I know he did something, and then I go, but I can't quite remember what it is. That's kind of blocking. And then maybe later at some point I'll go, oh yeah, Kevin, CBC, Stag, other things like that. Oh yeah, I remember stuff about Kevin. So that's kind of blocking, and that can occur at almost any time. And emotion can sometimes override memory, so that you forget some of those things. So blocking is one of them. Then there's the thing called absent-mindedness, which is another error of omission of memory. So you set your keys down. So I don't know about you guys, and I don't know about the folks in the audience, but I put my keys in pretty much the same spot every time I come home, because if I don't, I'm likely not to remember where I put them, basically, because I'm distracted by other things and get absent-minded about those kinds of things. So that form of an error of memory. And then a third one that's an error of omission is that memory's transient. Memories generally aren't there all the time. They can come and go from you kind of as time goes on. And actually, the transience of memory is actually a blessing. Some of the folks listening, and Kevin, you may know of this, there are individuals who are memory geniuses, I guess would be the right word. They're just memory athletes in some ways. There are folks with photographic memories that never forget anything. That's actually not necessarily a great thing for the human brain. Matter of fact, there was a famous person who had photographic memory in the old Russia, a guy named Shereshevsky, and he was studied by a famous psychologist named Luria, Alexander Luria, and turned out Shereshevsky never forgot almost anything, and he had pretty much virtual memory of everything that actually occurred. The problem for Shereshevsky is he was dysfunctional as a human being because he remembered too many things. So sometimes the transience of memory is a good thing, particularly something that wasn't so pleasant for you. Not remembering it can be a really good thing. So those are three errors of omission for him. And then our brains commit errors as well. So sometimes what we think is a memory is really just a biased recollection, biased because of past things that have happened to us, biased because of how we think about others in our society. But bias is a big feature of it. A second big feature is that we tend to misattribute things. So you said some things to me, Kevin, and I go, yeah, that's really important. And then I go tell somebody else about the conversation, and by the time I get there, I'm attributing it to somebody else. Oh, I think so and so told me this, and I'll go maybe hours later or a day later, I'll go, oh man, Kevin Whalen told me this. That's misattribution, and that's a famous kind of error of commission for memory. And then some memories are persistent. They just hang on for way too long. This is what I was telling you about the Shereshevsky guy with was a photographic memory. That's a problem for things like PTSD. The remembrances are so graphic and so deeply ingrained that they become persistent, and they lead to dysfunction in many cases. And then the final one, not to belabor this diatribe on memory, but it's our memories are subject to suggestibility. The police know this. They know that how you interview and how you talk to another human being about what they remember, an eyewitness, is subject to suggestibility. They can be suggested to remember things that never actually happened to us. There are people like Roddy Roeder here at WashU and others kind of up in Elizabeth Loftus in Seattle who studied so-called false memories. And they really do exist. False memories really do exist. And it has to do sometimes with just the suggestibility of who's examining the individual and how they're led down a path to remember things that actually really never occurred to them. That's been studied in very great detail. So anyway, Kevin, that's just to summarize that kind of stuff about errors that our brains make. And I hope that kind of helps in thinking about the problem.
Oh, so here I am. You have a child that has some behavior issues and this, that, and whatever. And anyway, you say, hey, uh, pay attention. And she would put her index and her middle finger and her thumbs together, like, electrical, to, and it seemed like she was really paying attention, studying hard, right? You get
Yep.
that picture? Okay.
Yep.
Is there something that a man, woman, or child can do at the moment of a surety that they will not jump, that they would stay on the ledge or get off the ledge backwards uh, in their emotional state? Is there something physically they can do?
Yeah. Well, first of all, is get out of danger. Realize that you put yourself in sometimes in a bad place, and getting away from the bad place is a really important thing. And then, secondly, it gets back to that mental trilogy idea. The beauty of our brains is that they may be there may be errors, and that is sometimes the things we think are the most awful things that have ever happened to us, and it's never going to get better. That's an error that the brain is generating. And the higher order parts of the brain, if you can dampen down the emotion, so things like mindfulness, things like those kinds of approaches to kind of dampen the emotion that's tied into something, because emotions make us not think necessarily better, and let the higher parts of our brain kind of take over and realize this is by the way, this is the essence of cognitive part of cognitive behavioral therapy. The cognitive part of cognitive behavioral therapy is challenging the negative assumptions that we have kind of in our thinking and in our lives, and saying that's really not true, because sometimes we let the emotions in our brain tell us that it's awful, it's never going to get better. Well, that's not really true. And, and if you can get humans to refocus their cognition and to help dampen down the emotions, those are big things. So you just hit on, and I'm not a cognitive behavioral therapist, so you've probably got some folks, I hope, in the audience who can step in and tell you a whole lot more about cognitive behavioral therapy than I do. It's a great form of therapy for a lot of people. And the cognitive part is doing just that. It's overriding our negative thinking and how we think about things. My first comment to you about the person on the ledge, and the ledge can be, figurative, the ledge can be
Yes.
real,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Yeah.
The ledge can be, I'm not going to be here tomorrow if I don't get off this ledge. Uh, the first thing I said was the B part of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is behavior. You get them off the ledge behaviorally. You move them away from the ledge by making them do something else. That's the behavioral part of cognitive behavioral therapy. Your people will tell you, oh, Kevin, I feel so bad. I can't get out of bed. I can't do anything. Well, cognitive behavioral therapist doesn't accept that. The first thing they're doing is making you get out of bed, the B word part of behavior in cognitive behavioral therapy. Get up, get out of bed. You are going to go for a walk. You're going to make breakfast. You're going to clean your room. That's a Jordan Peterson kind of statement. That's a behavioral thing that you can do that all of a sudden starts to dampen down, and over time can dampen down your emotional response to what you perceive as being really negative circumstances and whatnot. So I hope that helps. But that question about the ledge is a really great one, and it leads right into forms of things that people can do, like around mindfulness, stress reduction, things like learning principles of cognitive behavioral therapy. Remember, these days you can go out to the internet and find internet-based forms of cognitive behavioral therapy. So it's debatable whether they're as good as what you get from a highly trained and great therapist, but highly trained and great therapists are not always easy to come by. So learning the skills of cognitive behavioral therapy can serve us all very well. So I'm a big proponent of that form of way of talking with patients and human beings in general, in helping people think about the problems in their lives. So I hope that helps. But your question is a great one.
Oh man, I'm on the Isle of Hope, bro. You got me going really good. Last two, and then we'll have you close it up. Is is it safe to play cards with you when you're able to look at my facial expressions to see what hand I'm holding? Is it
I, I'm a horrible card player, man,
okay?
because I'm too emotional. I just, and people, people. That's a great question, Kevin. People, people would say, well, soccer must have been this intellectual thing for you, man. There was nothing. It became an understanding of the game and watching the flow of the game on the field. Man, so many doors open up when you understand how the game is played. It becomes a cognitive kind of thing. But that's not you. The reason I started by talking about athletes, partly this show's about soccer, right? Is
Right.
is in the locker room, those players are jacked up. I mean, and the bigger the game, the more jacked up the players are, and they all do it in different ways. But when you get out on the field, you can dissipate that emotion quickly. The first time you get kicked, or the first time you kick a ball, man, sometimes that stuff is all gone because there's a behavioral thing that's actually happening. But for me, as a goalkeeper, the play's all in front of you. And you remember what this was like. You see it all. And man, I'm like hyper jacked about where the problems are going to come from, and that's what I'm yelling to the players who are in front of me is where I see the problems kind of coming from. So for me, the game was highly emotional game, and I. I would say I played it, and this is terrible to say. So I'm supposed to be a psychiatrist who knows something about tempering emotions. I played it in some version of a controlled state of rage. Every time I walked on the field, my anxiety turned into just rage. I mean, I was just pissed off, and we were not going to give up goals. That's how I was going to play the game. And the problems weren't my teammates. I needed them and wanted them to be the best they could. But was I was angry when I walked on the field. And that's a terrible description, but fortunately I live a calmer life now, but I still have that trait in me. So the bottom line with this, Kevin, is I don't think I'm any good at playing cards.
But my research has came to where you are at with that inner rage controlled with the time and space. That's the best way to get a great result.
Yeah, I think so, but it's got to be controlled. And so the big question then comes, and it's back to my brain is hungry kind of thing. If your brain is tired and it's out of gas, it is really hard to control its emotions. God, I remember a World Cup final. I think it was Italy against France X number of years ago. Remember the great midfielder for France, Zinedine Zidane,
Oh
was
yeah.
was God was a phenomenal player. Well, they're in the second overtime, I think, against Italy, and they're about headed to penalty kicks, and the Italian defender baits him into punching him
Yeah.
in the game. And Zidane's one of the highest level professionals. Oh, Zidane was just drained, and his brain wasn't working, and he overly emotionally reacts, gets booted out of the game, and he can't take penalty kicks, and Italy ends up winning that game. But a
Yeah.
horrible outcome. And think about the last final, the end of the game, Spain versus Argentina. The Argentine players were beat. They were done. And the emotions started coming out after the game because they were playing in a state of rage that they couldn't control anymore, and the game was over. And they had gotten beaten, so they have the triggers for anger, which is it was unfair what happened to us during the game. That's a big trigger for anger. So you see this in the highest level of athletes. You see versions of this kind of stuff, which means the brain being drained of its energy and not being able to function at its highest level is a trigger for many of these emotions and things.
Man, I'm telling you, I got, I mean, what a load of information, useful information. And so here we are. We're coming to that time to say that, Doctor, whatever you want to say to who you ever want to say it to for as long as you want to say it for.
Well, thanks, Kevin. First of all, coming on your show is a great decompressing thing for me. So I get to come on here and just babble. So this is kind of fun for me. I hope it helps some of the people who are listening that thinking about these kinds of issues. And there are people way smarter than I have who've written about all of these things and can put them in much better terms than I do. But I love the opportunity to come back here and talk about them in the sports kind of situation. But the people that we've talked about before. I mean, I'm thinking about I'm thinking about the thing about being jacked up and anxious going into a game. By the way, coaches are the same way. And God, I'd love to hear Terry Mickler talk about that. For me, when I was coaching with SLU with Joe Clark and Joe would say the same thing. We're both jacked up going into the game. The problem as a coach is that you don't have a release for it. You just walk to the sidelines and you have to watch your 11 do whatever it is they're going to do against those. When you walk on the field and play the game, you get hit or you have to kick a ball and you got to run. You can get the emotion down and back under somewhat better control. As a coach, you're just there. All you got is cognition to help you override the emotion. And sometimes you're trying to figure out, God, what do we do now? We look terrible, or we look really good, or whatever. So anyway, the lessons with Joe Clark, that was one of the things he used to say was, you never get rid of the anxiety during a game as a coach, And so,
Wow. Well, Doctor, very enjoyable time, and we don't have a set, but you can rest assured we're gonna reach out and ask you back. That's for sure. But I don't know the time or space where the universe gets us together. But
hey man, I don't even know what we're going to talk about, but it'll get weird.
yeah,
Whatever it is.
yeah, baby, yeah. Oh man. Well, I'm gonna. Man, this is really something. I hope that you're able. And you said that you have a good time here, so I'll leave it at that. So because this is a special time for the whales, I guarantee, and people that listen to it, they have said the same thing. So the best to you, Doctor.
Thanks, Kevin. And hey, if I saw some of the things correctly, you're beyond 600 shows now. If I saw things correctly, is that correct?
Oh, absolutely, baby.
That is great, and many great shows along the way. But I remember 500 with Terry Mickler. That one's burned in my brain, and so
Nice. I'll pass that on to him. Or he'll he listens to him, so he will listen to this.
that's great. All right, Kevin. Well, thanks, and we'll talk again sometime.
All right, Doctor. Bye bye,
Bye bye.